Here we go. Hey, let's do it. Hey, giddy up on three. 1, 2, 3. Giddy up.
You can feel the buzz when you're around this city. People have fallen in love with the Birmingham Stallions. Here we go. We're getting a little juice going.
USFL championship.
All right, James. Well, believe it or not, we are back here for another UFL season. It was a little bit of a tumultuous offseason, but that's just the way things go in spring football. I think we've learned by now. But believe it or not, we're here, and it's time for the season to kick off. And the Stallions open their season on the road against the DC Defenders, who, speaking of a tumultuous offseason, had some interesting events unfold in the last couple of weeks that you were sort of on top of. So I thought we could maybe start by just addressing the elephant in the room. DC's head coach, Reggie Barlow, is out, taking the job at Tennessee State. He also has announced that more or less all the key pieces of his staff in DC will be heading to Tennessee State to join him after the season concludes. And Shannon Harris, the former quarterbacks coach, or still quarterbacks coach, but has also been elevated to interim head coach. DC does retain their offensive and defensive coordinators. But I wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously that's going to have some effects on the season, but particularly this opening game, how much or little do you think that kind of these changes that have unfolded in the last couple of weeks for DC are going to play into this game or be a factor in this season opener against Birmingham?
I think it'll definitely carry over at least a little bit when you lose your head coach and then see all the news that, more of the coaching staff is going to be leaving for Tennessee State. And then you also see the reports where, like, apparently during this UFL season, like, some of these guys will still be on calls with Barlow and kind of preparing for Tennessee State. It makes you wonder, like, okay, how committed are they to actually playing in the UFL this year? Or, coaching the UFL, making sure this team actually stays on track. So I am a little worried for DC. I feel like this isn't as bad as a situation as Memphis, but it's definitely not ideal. And I think it's unfortunate where, the defenders were kind of ramping up. They felt like they were ready to have a bit of a comeback season after last year was pretty disappointing. But this kind of puts a halt in that, and now you're coming out against the defending champions, three in a row in Birmingham, and you've got your head coach as an interim who doesn't really have any experience at that level quite yet. So we'll see how it all plays out. I know the UFL executives are very confident in Shannon and what he can do, but I do think it definitely affects DC, especially early in the season against some of these tough opponents.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you were talking about them sort of having coaches meetings for Tennessee State during the season while they're having meetings for the UFL and that sort of thing. I mean, when this news first broke, I wasn't terribly worried for DC because they kept all their other pieces. And, I think Reggie Barlow was as much of kind of a culture guy and guy who oversaw the team and the staff as he was, the mind behind the offense or the defense. So I kind of thought, without him there, that's going to be a hit. But, he's been there for a few years now. They kind of probably have things down to a science of how they do things as a team. And I was like, they might be able to kind of ride out the storm. But then once you kind of heard the news that like all these coaches are leaving after the season and they're going to be having meetings during the season, college game, like there's recruiting in the off season, like NIL stuff, like it's just kind of a year-round gig now. And, I don't know. I think most people have a hard enough time doing one job. It's going to be difficult, I think, for those coaches to kind of do two jobs at once and be, fully all in. And of course, like you said, for the players, when you kind of know your coach has got one foot in, one foot out the door, it's hard to imagine that that's going to help them be more successful this year. So, obviously time will tell, but it doesn't, certainly doesn't seem like an ideal situation. But, despite that fact, obviously DC has some key pieces coming back. Obviously, quarterback Jordan Ta'amu, who people in the spring football space are very familiar with, and Stallions fans are probably very familiar with. But for Stallions fans who maybe haven't followed DC as closely this offseason as Birmingham or maybe some other USFL conference teams, I mean, what's your kind of read on DC and them heading into this season? Obviously, Abram Smith, who was a big part of their offense 2 years ago, is back, but he's coming off a torn ACL, and then they've got some other returning and new pieces. What do you think are maybe some key parts of this Defenders roster that GM Von Hutchins has put together?
The key one that you mentioned is Abram Smith coming back. He played such a big role in the success that DC had in 2023 when they went on their championship run. Obviously, got hurt towards ACL in training camp last year, which was a huge blow, and it just that was an issue that just seeped throughout the entire season for DC. Right, their run game was basically non-existent the entire year. Jordan Tiamu just had way too much on his shoulders. But something that kind of isn't talked about enough that I really feel like is was one of the thorns in the flesh for DC last year, the offensive line. And they had so many injuries. They had so many guys go down, guys moving positions to fill in. They were bringing in guys, fresh off the street basically during the year. That was an issue because Tiamu was getting just he was getting destroyed in the pocket some of these games. Like you could tell his confidence just wasn't there, and a lot of that stems from the offensive line not being able to protect. So if DC can kind of right the ship in that regard this year, I think that'll be huge, and I think they have. They brought in a lot of good talent. They're going to be missing Liam Fornadel, which is really tough. But on the flip side, they've added some legit guys that have been in the NFL before. Tykeem Doss comes to mind. Gunnar Britton is another young prospect that I really like. Johari Branch, he has some experience in the IFL and also was a standout at Maryland. These are some guys that can really help this line play better football. And Luke, I feel like it's something we talked about before maybe, but Jordan Tiamu, I love the guy. I think he's a great quarterback. He cannot perform when all the pressure's on him, right? And this is what we saw last year. He had no support in the run game, had no support really from the offensive line, and what happened? He led the league in interceptions. DC crumbled down the stretch, they missed the playoffs. This year, I think we have a little bit more of a chance of seeing a more confident and cohesive Jordan Tiamo on the field. As long as the offensive line holds up, as long as he gets help from the running game, that's going to be the key thing. If you can't block, Tiamu's going to start making poor decisions just like we saw last year, and DC season is going to go down the drain.
I mean, do you think it's fair to say that for DC, Ta'amu was sort of a plan B heading into this year? Because originally they had Emory Jones, and it kind of looked like he might be the guy in line to take over for them and kind of give them some a different look at quarterback than they've had the last couple of years, and see if there's maybe any improvement there. And Ta'amu didn't sign until pretty late into the offseason and after Jones, inked a deal with an NFL team to head back to the NFL on a futures contract. So, I mean, Plan B might not be the most complimentary way of putting it, but it's kind of seemed like the way DC's offseason unfolded looked like maybe they were kind of trying to do what the Battlehawks did when they moved on from AJ McCarron. And again, not to say that AJ is a bad player or Ta'amu is a bad player, but neither of those teams have been able to get over the hump with those quarterbacks. And so it seemed like maybe DC was looking to go a different direction and just see if that could get them over the hump. But then when it all sort of shook out, they kind of ended up having to go back to Ta'amu. I mean, you feel like that's a fair read of the situation?
I think it's definitely a possibility. Obviously, DC is not going to confirm that or really go out. I mean, they have full faith in Tiamu. But yeah, I mean, the fact that it took him so long to return and he didn't come back until after Jones had signed, his deal with the Falcons, and I think that's where he's at right now. So it's kind of, an interesting scene on that end because, I was, and look, I hate to be too critical of Jordan Tiamu because he is a legend in the scene and he's done a lot of good. But, I wrote a whole piece in the offseason about how DC, if they really want to get over the hump and if they really want to get back to being a championship contender, I feel like they need a new, fresh face in there. Like, this doesn't mean that Tomu's not good. It just means that, like, sometimes you need fresh blood in there to revive an organization, to get you to the point where, okay, we can compete with Birmingham again. We can compete with San Antonio again. So we'll see how Tiamu does. I do think the team's at least in a better situation on that end. And speaking of, the wide receiver room, once again, he's going to be working with a lot of new guys. This happens every year. They lost their three leading receivers last season, or excuse me, last offseason. And now this offseason, they lost a couple guys too. Calvin Harmon won't be returning. That's a big loss for them on that end. They have a couple of guys that kind of dropped off. So, yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it all plays out. But I do think that Emory Jones could have been like one of those young Adrian Martinez type prototypes that could have helped this DC franchise out a lot.
If I could go back to something that you were kind of talking about in terms of kind of new look with DC, you mentioned some of the new offensive linemen they've brought in, some of the ways they changed their offensive line, and I think anybody who follows this space, it's no secret that your offensive line can kind of make or break your success. And that's not just true for spring football. That's true for football at any level. I think the more football I've watched over the years, the more convinced I am that, games are won and lost in the trenches more than anywhere else. That being said, the Stallions have sort of a more or less kind of new look defensive line and front seven. They do bring back some pieces in, defensive tackle, especially interior defensive line, with Willie Yarberry coming back and hopefully being healthy, Marvin Wilson coming back, Carlos Davis, all USFL, or excuse me, all UFL. Defense, still getting used to that a year into it here. All UFL defensive tackle is back. And then at the linebacker spot, Gates and Tizino, who are kind of more or less for most of last year, the starting guys are back. But then you've also got some new guys, obviously Perrion Winfrey kind of rotating in there on the interior. You've also got at the linebacker spot, a couple new guys in Russell and Crowder. We all I think saw the clip
to
of
watch this year.
Yeah. I think we all saw the clip of Crowder, blowing a guy up in the showboat scrimmage, and maybe he was going a little too hard for the scrimmage. I don't know, but either way,
apparently that hit might have shut down the scrimmage. I'm not gonna comment on that fully, but yeah.
yeah, I could imagine Memphis players probably weren't thrilled about a guy getting blown up like that in a scrimmage. But I mean, if you've watched Tay Crowder and his highlights, I mean, he's the only person I've ever seen flat back Derrick Henry. So I think even if he's going 50%, speed or whatever, 75% speed, he's liable to still blow you up. So, they've got those guys in the mix now. And then off the edge, they've got a whole entirely new room because they were so successful last year. Most of their guys, Tillman, Garvin, et cetera, have kind of moved on to NFL opportunities. And Taco Charlton's getting a little bit older. And so they brought in some new, fresh young faces. And it'll be really interesting to see kind of what those guys do, Ronnie Perkins, Bradley and I, et cetera. My cat's very excited about the Stallions, if you couldn't tell. So I'm curious to hear, that's a long way of previewing the question of saying, I think that's going to be obviously a key matchup in this game. How successful can that Stallions front seven be against DC's offensive line, and how does DC's offensive line hold up? It's a little bit speculative because there are a lot of new faces involved in these matchups. But what do you anticipate? How do you see that one sort of playing out? Do you think DC can hold up against the Stallions front seven, or do you think the Stallions front seven is really going to be able to kind of have their way?
I think DC is in a bit of trouble. I like what they've done with their offensive line. I think it's really unfortunate for them that their first matchup of the year is against Birmingham, because I think the Stallions do have the best front seven in the league. Kind of you could argue for San Antonio, but I think Birmingham has the edge, no pun intended. So we'll kind of see how that one shakes out. But for DC, it's a shame because I feel like they have some new pieces, they have new energy. You're gonna go out there and you're gonna have to block Carlos Davis, Perrion Winfrey, Ronnie Perkins, DJ Coleman, Myjai Sanders, not to mention like a couple of the guys, some of the vets that are really solid pieces as well. I mean, Willie Yarberry is a guy that's performed at a high level the last few years. And then on top of that, in the linebacker room, we already talked about it, but like you got Tay Crowder maybe blitzing up the middle. Tizino's gonna be flying around. He's gonna be in the backfield making plays as he always does. So it's going to be a true test for this DC organization, and I hope their offensive line can hold up, and that way this game stays competitive, but I'm a little concerned that if Birmingham's getting that momentum built early in this game, it might be too tough to stop.
Yeah, I mean, obviously time will tell, but I think this Birmingham defensive line could end up being as good as last year was, as good as other defensive lines we've seen in the league, like Michigan and some other teams. This defensive line, certainly, I think, at least just on paper, in terms of the talent, has the potential to be the best unit we've maybe ever seen in spring football. I mean, you've got guys like you mentioned with Myjai Sanders, Ronnie Perkins, Perrion Winfrey, Carlos Davis. I mean, hypothetically, if those guys were the starting four, let's just say every single one of those guys was an NFL draft pick. Other Davis was a sort of day 3, round 7 guy, but the other guys were round 3 and 4 draft picks. All of them have NFL experience. All of them have sacks in the NFL. All of them have played in multiple NFL games. On paper, I mean, you could, a couple of years ago, when you talk about names like Perrion Winfrey, Marvin Wilson, Ronnie Perkins, Myjai Sanders, I mean, those are all guys that, like, right now you would expect would be starting defensive linemen in the NFL, or at least rotational guys. And so I think, again, time will tell. Obviously, games aren't won on paper. And, how early a guy was drafted in the NFL, ultimately, we all watched Paxton Lynch a couple of years ago, so that ultimately doesn't always translate. But I do think, these guys have something to prove. They have a chip on their shoulder, and just again on paper, they're the kind of the most one of the most talented groups, if not the most talented group in the UFL. And I think DC certainly's got their work cut out for them. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Birmingham side. You know, we talked some about the defense, but as far as the offense goes, I feel like there's not a lot of questions. You know, you've got a lot back, right? You've got four, you know, if you look back at the starting offensive line last year in week 1, 4 of the same offensive linemen are back. The only one you don't have is Zach Johnson, who, you know, was an all UFL lineman, has gone on to the NFL. But otherwise, you've got, you know, the same kind of core offensive lineman back, plus some new pieces to potentially step in as well. You've got a lot of receivers back, not only from last year, but also from 2 years ago with Davion Davis, LaMichael Petway, Austin Watkins. You sort of have some of the best of last year and the year before, other than maybe Kevin Austin, who, again, also has gone on to the NFL. Running back room is identical to last year. So I feel like there's a lot of known entities on the Birmingham side, at least as far as the offense goes. The big question obviously is quarterback, and not so much like, you know, some of these other teams are in a situation where it's like, you know, they're bringing in brand new guys and we don't know what it's going to be like. I mean, we kind of know what they've got in all 3 of their quarterbacks, in Alex McGough, Case Cookus, and Matt Corral. The question is more of just who plays, who starts, do multiple guys play? And, you know, full disclosure, at least as of the time of us recording this, the depth chart hasn't been released yet. We don't really, at least I, you know, unless you know more than I do, I don't have a sense exactly on what the plan is going to this game. And I think Skip probably wants to kind of keep it hush hush a little bit. But so we're just kind of, you know, throwing stuff at the wall here and seeing what sticks going into the game. But what's your impression, or what's your read on who you think maybe will get the start, who will play, how much, you know, we might see 2 quarterbacks versus only 1. Yeah, that's the question in Birmingham, right? So what you know?
It's a question, but like the problem with Skip Holtz is that you never know what to expect sometimes, right? I mean, sometimes he'll be up front and he'll be like, "No, we're gonna do this, this, and that," and then other times, kind of in this scenario, he's like, he just beats around the bush and he does his coach talk, and you know, he just likes to keep us all on the edge of what's actually gonna happen. I think Alex McGough will probably be the starter come Sunday. That's just the gut feeling that I have, especially just some of the conversations I've had with some of the people within the organization. It definitely seems like McGough might be, you know, he was the guy in 2023, and it's tough to say that he wouldn't be this year, given his past success, given how Skip loves him, given how the team just rallies around Alex. They didn't really rally around Matt the same way. It's not that, and no disrespect to Matt, it's not the same thing. So I think if we see a starter, it's going to be Alex. Doesn't mean that we don't see a 2 QB system, though. I mean, Skip, I can't remember. I feel like we were both on that call. Maybe it was just me, but Skip at some point this year, I thought he kind of alluded to maybe backing off a bit from the 2 QB system. But odds are, I mean, especially depending on how things go in DC, let's say that, you know, the defenders are seriously struggling and things aren't going the way that they expected. Maybe we do see both quarterbacks just for the heck of it, just so both of them get flight. I hope it's Alex. I think he has higher upside for what he can do with this offense and just the scheme in general that he's been a part of with Holtz for a couple of years already. But we'll see. We'll see how that all shakes out. I can't guarantee anything because it's literally Skip Holtz. He could change his mind at the last second. We've seen him do it before, and I'm sure we'll see him do it again.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I think I think you're right that my read on the situation, just kind of reading between the lines of what some of Skip has said, is actually I don't think it's super likely he does the 2 quarterback thing this year. I know a lot of people are kind of expecting that because the Stallions have done it basically almost every season the last 3 years. However, if you remember last year, a couple weeks into the season, Skip got away from the 2 QB thing. I mean, he still was playing 2, but he got away from playing 2 in one game. You know, he was like, okay, I'm going to let Adrian start a game and play the whole game. I'm going to let Matt start a game and play a whole game, and kind of go back and forth that way. And he's like, you know, it's just they prefer it that way. It's better for them to get into a rhythm that way. And he kind of stuck with that until Adrian became the full-time starter. And like you said, based on some of his comments in kind of a press event earlier, you know, somebody kind of asked him, like, do you think you'll plan on playing 2 QBs? And I think the easy, obvious answer for him to say, like, oh, yeah, Matt and Alex are both great. They're both ready to play. Like, you'll see both of them. But he's like, you know, I'm not really ready to commit to that. Like, we'll see. But, like, it's also very likely, like, I kind of pick one and basically go with that guy. And so I actually, like you said, I think if the Stallions get like a really big lead or something like that, then I think it's certainly possible. We could see both. But I actually don't think it's super likely that he goes into the game with a plan of saying, okay, Matt's going to get 2 series, then Alex is going to get 2 series, then vice versa or whatever. And I think leading up until this game, I kind of felt similar to you. I really felt like Alex was probably going to be the starter. I do think the injury report that came out that said Alex was dealing with some quad issues just maybe a little bit hesitant, just because I could see a world in which if Alex is not 100%, Skip says, hey, I don't want to throw you out there and risk worsening this and losing you for 6 weeks or the rest of the season. I'd rather you sit out for a week and have you the rest of the year than risk that. So I think that's kind of the one thing that's making me kind of my gut would have been Alex, but I think seeing that injury report now, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know. Is there a chance that we see Matt given that? I mean, I think I agree with you that, Alex has been in the system a little bit longer. I think him and Skip have a lot better, at least, again, this is reading between the lines somewhat from what you see on TV and stuff like that. I'm not going off some, super insider information here, but I think you can just kind of tell, right, that Skip and Alex just have a really special rapport that it doesn't seem like, Matt necessarily has had with Skip. He hasn't obviously been with Skip as long. Alex, knows the system super well. Like, he had arguably the best spring football season at least in recent history a couple years ago. It's kind of like, if Tom Brady left the Patriots and came back and people were like sitting around questioning if Tom Brady was going to start,
Right.
Like, Alex is sort of the closest thing we've had to that dominant of a quarterback in the UFL. So it's hard to imagine a world in which he doesn't be the guy. But obviously Matt, is super talented. I think he's definitely easily, I think, a top 5 quarterback, if not a top 3 quarterback in this league. I think both of them are. And so, it's not like it's different from the NFL where you typically don't have 2 quarterbacks of that level on the same roster, So I mean, I think Alex would be kind of like long-term the guy that I think will be the guy if I had to put money on it. But again, that's just speculation. But I think given, potentially some of how his quad is doing and stuff like that, I could see a world where, Alex I wouldn't say he's prone to injury per se, because we saw him complete a full season in 2023 and have no issues. But if you remember in 2022, he had some injury issues, and that's what led to Jamar coming in. And then when he went to play in Green Bay, this past fall in 2024, part of the reason he got cut from Green Bay was an injury as well. And so he's not one of those guys that's like injury prone, where it's like every year he's going to have some kind of injury, but he's also not a guy that it's unheard of for him to get, hurt, or for him to have zero durability issues. And obviously he's not getting any younger and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's a long way of me saying, like, I could see a world in which Skip wants to play it really safe. He knows DC is kind of dealing with some of these issues, and he says, hey, let's give Matt a shot, see how it goes. If we need to bring Alex in, we can, but let's not risk him getting hurt. But who knows? I mean, obviously,
that would be, in my opinion, that would be the only way Corral starts, is if it is a legit potential injury for Alex. If not, and if that's just, just a random little blip in the chart, Alex should for sure be the starter. I just don't see why he wouldn't be. And, offensively, with the guys that they brought back, Jay Sternberger's in there, Davion Davis is in there, Austin Watkins is back. Like, these are all guys who were very successful with Alex Magoo. And not that, I mean, Jace was all UFL last year with I mean, Corral was kind of there for some of that. But, it feels like the team has so much more just like energy and passion when they play with Magoo. And you see more passion out of Magoo than Corral. Like Alex, it just feels like it's hard to like fully explain it, but I feel like you kind of understand what I'm saying here. Where Alex is just, there's a special feeling in Birmingham when he's the quarterback, when he's the guy, and I think they have a good chance at mimicking what they did in 2023 with him at the helm. So we'll see. I mean, to me, it's insane that they have the 3 quarterbacks that they do. Like, I can't believe that Case Cook is his quarterback 3 in the system right now. Like, you should throw him, and it makes sense. Case at this point of his career feels like he's kind of just he's just there because he wants to still throw football around a little bit, get paid for it, kind of be in the football scene. I don't think he's really trying. I mean, especially the thing that Skip said, I can't remember if it was this week or if it was the week prior, but it's like, Case is just there to he's just there to get reps and kind of, he's just there, he's just
Yeah.
existing with the Stallions. So, good for him. I'm glad he's back in the league, but, it also brings up if Alex is the guy, does Corral request a trade?
Yeah.
You look at a couple of these quarterback rooms. I mean, I'm not super confident in St. Louis right now. I'm not gonna lie.
No, I think that's not a possibility that I want to spend too much time thinking about at this point, but I think it is a real possibility for sure. Because I think, and I get it. Like if I'm Corral, I don't want to have a second year being the second guy in a league where I know I'm one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So I don't know. Maybe in a couple of weeks we can have that conversation more fully when we see how things unfold. But it is funny to think about if you went back to the 2022 USFL championship game. Stallions versus Stars. Case Cookus. Looks like he's going to lead the Stars to victory, but then he gets hurt. Jamar gets hurt. Alex comes in. They win the championship, and then fast forward, 3 years later, and here we are with Alex coming back from the NFL to play for the Stallions in a new merged league with the XFL. And Case Cookus is actually also on the Stallions roster as QB3. I mean, it's just kind of funny how these storylines have unfolded over the last few years for
It's
those
spring
guys who have been
football.
involved.
It's like I
Yeah.
think this is why we love it so much. Like us gurus, it's like just watching the way it all unfolds, watching where guys go, where they come from. I mean, there's some fun storylines this year with some of the guys that have ended up in different camps and different places. I mean, we'll see how it all plays out, but I'm excited to watch what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, last thing I'll say about this, and then we can kind of move on here and start to wrap up. But I think you're right. I mean, there's just a different energy with Alex. I mean, part of that is just personality. Like Alex is
Yeah.
just a super fun guy. He's very kind of loose. He jokes around. Like, there's a reason that Alex has had a lot more media, like events and things like that, than Corral has. And I've tried not to read in that too much because I think partially it's just their personalities, right? Like, and again, that's not a knock on Matt. I mean, that's totally fine. Like, but it's just, Alex is just, he's kind of a made for TV kind of guy. Like, he's got the different haircuts all the time, and he's got funny stories and he'll talk and stuff like that. Whereas Matt is just kind of more like Adrian was last year too, just kind of to the point, all business. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think it makes it a lot easier for fans and probably to some extent, maybe even players to connect with Alex, to really kind of rally behind him. I mean, Alex is definitely probably one of, if not my favorite football players of all time. And part of that is his play on the field, but part of that is also just who he is and his personality and how fun he is and the guy he is off the field and talking to him and all that kind of stuff. So I think for the culture of the team and just for the camaraderie of all these returning guys on offense and stuff like that, I think you're certainly right that there's just a different vibe when Alex is sort of at the helm. And that's just an intangible thing. That's not necessarily, again, a knock on Corral, but it just is what it is. And it's a factor that you have to kind of consider when you're sort of, I'm sure a coach making these decisions and all that kind of thing. But maybe one final question before we kind of wrap up and make some predictions here. One other question I do kind of have about the offense that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on is, what do you anticipate out of the receiver room, just in the sense that you have a lot of returning guys from last year, like Deion Kane, Amari Rogers, Marlon Williams, et cetera. But then you also have, again, like I said, some of these guys from 2 years ago, like Davion Davis and Austin Watkins. Those guys played with Alex Magoo. Some of the guys who were at the team just last year, like Amari Rogers, didn't. And then you've got some brand new faces like Jalen Camp, Cade Johnson, and then you obviously throw the tight end room in there and all that kind of thing. I mean, there's a ton of weapons. Probably my guess is, as you've seen with Stallions in years past, there's probably not just going to be like one guy who gets all the touches, all the catches. It's probably going to be a committee sort of approach. But if you had to kind of single out one or two guys, particularly in the receiver room, I think, because we kind of maybe know more what to expect in the tight end room, but in the receiver room, is there a guy or two that you expect to kind of maybe rise a little bit above the others and kind of get, line share of receptions or kind of looks, or do you think it's really just going to be kind of evenly spread across the board?
I think it'll be relatively even spread, but what's intriguing to me, and it's kind of been the staple of Skip Holtz and what he loves to do, is he can be very loyal to the guys that he wins with, And it makes sense. Like, why would you go out and get a bunch of replacements when you have proven guys who have been proven in your system that know how to play football at a high level in the UFL? So I'm looking at the breakdown, right, where you bring back guys like Austin Watkins and Davion Davis. You have Marlon Williams back for another year, and Marlon, he really stepped up last year. I thought he was like, I mean, it's a real shame there wasn't like a comeback player of the year type of award because he definitely would have deserved it. But to do what he did, especially with a couple of the injuries that Birmingham had to their wide receiver room last year. He came back, really showed out, and proved why he's one of the elite slot receivers in this league. I think you put together, like, you basically take the best of both worlds from like the 2022/2023 rosters, the 2024 roster, and then you add in a guy like Jalen Camp, who's got legit NFL caliber experience and potential. He's a very speedy receiver, should be like a deep threat for sure, in my opinion. So put all those pieces together, and you've got another high quality squad. What I like about this squad in particular is that it takes some of the pressure off of Deion Kane. I felt
Yeah.
that Kane, he was kind of forced into the wide receiver one role last year just because of some of the injuries and maybe just some of the guys that were trying to get up to speed in Skip Holtz's system last year. Where Kane, don't get me wrong, he had a good year, but there were a lot of moments where Kane, he dropped balls. Like, he dropped a couple touchdown passes. There were some deep balls where, like, it was just clear that him and Adrian Martinez weren't on the same page. And it was a little odd to watch because he's tremendous and he obviously had a lot of success. But now I think that, since he won't have as much attention on him from defenses, since they have to, now that the game plan for Austin Watkins back and Davion Davis back and Marlon Williams and Amari Rogers in the slot, and now Jalen Camp comes in, Cade Johnson. Like, you've got a lot of new faces. Well, not new faces, but you know what I mean. Like, there's a lot of guys there that provide Dion with more support. So I hope that in that regard, we'll see Kane have a little bit more of an efficient season. And I think that'll be the biggest difference that we see this year is Dion having less pressure, which in turn makes him a better receiver. Not to mention, the dude went off with Alex McGough. I mean, I
Yeah.
think having the two of them back in business, that's huge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when you think about that 2023 team, you know, Alex's kind of favorite targets, it seemed like, were Deion Kane, Davion Davis, and Jay Sternberger. And he's got all three of those guys back. And I think it's crazy to think about, like, what I expect the Stallions to do, as they've done in past years, is, they'll probably sort of more or less kind of two platoon it with the receiver corps, have three guys come on for a series, maybe next series have three different guys come on, kind of, there'll be a lot of rotation. But it's crazy to think about, like, one group of receivers could be, Deion Kane, Davion Davis, and Austin Watkins, and then those guys could come off, and then Amari Rogers, Marlon Williams, and Jalen Camp, could come on. And again, that doesn't even get into, like I said, Jay Sternberger, Petway, whether he's lining up at tight end or at receiver, Jordan Thomas, who can kind of also do the same. So it's difficult to know who, like, the guy is going to be when there's so many guys. So I think that's one of the things that it's not really an area of concern for the Stallions, but it's just an area of curiosity for me of, like, how are they going to incorporate all these different guys into the offense, and who's maybe really going to kind of emerge when you have so many guys with so much experience in this offense, with so much success, with so much kind of camaraderie and rapport with McGough and Corral from last year. And I think it'll just be kind of fascinating to see kind of, where the chips kind of fall when you start to see depth charts and playing time and how many snaps guys are getting. So yeah, that'll be something I'll definitely be following. Well, James, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I've kept you a tiny bit longer here than I planned, as per usual. But before you go, we got to make some predictions. So Stallions, Defenders, last game of the opening weekend, Sunday afternoon. If you put on the spot, what do you see happening?
I think the Stallions come away with a 27-12 win. I think it'll be, kind of like we saw last year. Offense takes a bit to get going, but once they get into a groove, DC's not going to be able to stop it. I think the defenders have enough talent to keep it somewhat close, but it's going to be one of those games where, like, the Stallions just kind of have command the whole time, and that would be my expectation for how it goes. I hope DC surprises me. I hope it's a little bit more competitive, but given just the last couple of weeks and given the fact that Birmingham once again has the best looking roster in the league, you can't really pick against them.
Yeah. I personally hope DC doesn't surprise you, but I think I'm going to have to go with you. I mean, I think, trying to look at it as objectively as I can. I mean, I do think it could be a little more competitive than maybe people might be tempted to. I think because the Stallions have been so successful and because of all the drama the defenders have had, I think there's a temptation maybe to say the Stallions kind of run away with this one by multiple touchdowns, which I think is very possible. I think it ends up being a little bit closer, maybe more competitive than people expect, just because looking back over the years, I mean, the Stallions have never really dominated in an opening game. They've never lost an opening game, and certainly hope I don't jinx that, but they've never really dominated, right? You know, they beat the Generals on that last second touchdown in 2022. They beat the Generals again in 2023, but it was a relatively close game.
I kind of feel like they did dominate. I think the last couple of years they've dominated the second halves, and that's what's
Yes,
been. They haven't
that's
gotten off
probably
to a
true.
fast start,
Yeah.
but 2023 against the Generals, that second half they really just shut them down. Hell, and then last year against Arlington, I mean that was a close game at half, and then next thing you know, the Stallions just ran away with it, and that was that.
Well, and I think part of that, and this is just my opinion, you know, who knows? I don't get paid to make these decisions, but I think part of that was some of the two QB thing too. You know, like, when like last year when it was like Matt was in for two series, then Adrian was coming in, then Matt was coming in, then Adrian was coming in. It was hard for them to, I think, get into a rhythm in Arlington, and so the offense never really clicked like you kind of maybe saw later in the year. And then 2 years ago, it was just kind of Jamar to start, and he kind of started the game really hot with that deep touchdown to Austin Watkins, but then things kind of like sputtered a little bit. But then when Alex came in, and he kind of got his feet under him and got that touchdown right before halftime, then in the second half, Alex kind of got into a groove and it was sort of game over. So I think you're right. You know, the Stallions haven't always got off to a hot start, but they've kind of finished strong. And last year when DC played the Stallions, it was a super close game. I mean, people probably remember that was the birth of the shirtless pyramid. That was when Ramiz Ahmed came in kind of out of nowhere. Not out of nowhere, but at least out of nowhere for the Stallions. I mean, he kind of had to come in, that week and replace Chris Blue, who had been injured, and kick that game-winning field goal. And Corral played that game. That was kind of right before Adrian sort of cemented himself as the starter. And so that was a last-second game-winning field goal kind of game. It was a good matchup. So I don't know. I mean, I think these teams are obviously different from last year. Is obviously again the drama with the DC coaching staff. They're getting to play in DC, which certainly I don't think hurts them, because I'm sure it'll be a great environment.
That
On
will be their saving grace, I think, will be
Yeah.
to keep things close or have any shot is the fact that they're at home.
Yes, I do think that certainly doesn't hurt them. But the Stallions have been super successful on the road in past years. I mean, I think the game against the Brahmas last year is the only game really they lost outside of Birmingham. So I think, I'm with you. I think the Stallions win this one. I do think, I think they probably win by, I don't know if they win by 15, but, maybe by 10. I mean, I could see it maybe being sort of a 24-14 kind of win. I think there's always a little bit of rust, at the beginning of the year, these offenses and things like that. And I think, Abram Smith, assuming he's healthy, I think he could have some success maybe if he can kind of get past the Stallions front seven and get to the second level. I could see him, having some success. But I think ultimately the Stallions just have too much firepower, regardless of the situation in DC. And then you throw the situation in DC on top of it. And it's hard for me to see how they come out with a win. But again, that's why they play the game, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think I'm with you. I think the Stallions win this one. So, all right, James. Well, I know you're a very busy man. Thanks for taking the time to do this between interviewing head coaches and offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators and writing articles and gearing up for this opening weekend of spring football. So, appreciate your time, man, and I hope you enjoy a full slate of UFL action this weekend.
Thank you. Yeah, same to you, Luke. It should be fun. I'm excited. The UFL's finally back, so praise the heavens, and we'll see. I think Birmingham gets a win this Sunday, so if they don't, you guys can blame me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, appreciate it, James, and we'll talk to you again hopefully soon. Giddy up.